All right. Accusations audits. The accusations audit is used to mitigate negatives. 3 places in the conversation: at the beginning, before an ask, before you share bad news. Proactively addressing the negative emotions and dynamics as the other side sees it is the beginning accusations audit. The accusations audit that you use at the beginning of the conversation. If you're at opposite ends of the spectrum, as far as a deal is concerned, a transaction is concerned, the conversation at some point is going to get difficult. If the conversation gets difficult, there's going to be a negative emotion or dynamic associated with the conversation that you have to deal with as quickly as possible. By virtue of the fact, let's say for the sake of this discussion, you're a buyer's agent. By virtue of the fact that you're going to be dealing with the listing agent, you guys want 2 different things, which means it could become difficult. Not to the point where you guys are screaming at each other, but when I talk about difficult conversations, I'm just talking about the generation of negative emotions, negative dynamics. If not dealt with, impede your counterpart's ability to think. And so we start them off at the beginning of the conversation because we know for a fact that they're harboring some opinion, assumption, or impression about us that is not favorable. And if you have time to prepare for the conversation, and most conversations you do, part of your preparation process should be compiling a list of the negative opinions, assumptions, impressions that the other side has about you, that the other side has about the circumstance, that the other side has about your buyer, that they may have about their client, the seller, that they have about real estate as a whole in today's market. Make a list of those things. And after you summarize why you guys are on the call to begin with, boom, you immediately jump into those accusations audits, to Marcella's point, to the point where they cut you off. And they said, and they're likely going to cut you off. You probably will not get through all of your accusations audits. I'm not saying that it never happens. It just rarely happens because they've got something else they need to do. Or, they'll say something to the effect, you're being too hard on yourself, or your client. I wasn't thinking any of those things. Let's get down to brass tacks. Either way, the conversation now moves in the direction that you ultimately want it to go, and it's not your idea. It's your counterpart's idea. This whole idea of protecting autonomy, deferring, and subordinating yourself to your counterpart is something that we are doing the entire conversation. There's not one accusations audit. There's not one label. There's not one mirror. There's not one instance of dynamic silence that is going to flip the script for you and move the needle in the direction where you want it to go. It's going to be the cumulative effect of all of the skills as you try to demonstrate tactical empathy for the other side. Starts with the accusations audit at the beginning of the conversation. Now, when you're putting together your accusations audit, you should prioritize those audits in terms of which one's the most powerful, which one is the weakest. For the sake of this discussion, you come up with 10 accusations audits. You need to rank those 1 through 10, most powerful, least powerful. And when you start out your accusations audits at the beginning, you're going to start out with number 2, and you're going to make sure that you end with number 1, the most powerful. The last impression is the lasting impression. So I want the last accusation to be the most impactful. Sharing bad news. How often have you had to share bad news in this environment? Daily, I would bet, especially if you're representing buyers or buyers. You're a buyer's agent. You're representing a buyer. You're sharing bad news multiple times a day, every day. You've put in 20 offers and you got turned down for all 20. How are you conveying that information? First of all, in today's environment, you need to get out ahead of this bad news so that it's not a surprise. You know for a fact it's a competitive market. How many times are you dropping that into your client's ear? You know for a fact that 5K over list is not going to cut it. How are you going to relay that? You know the days of multiple contingencies are gone. How do you relay that? You know that there are a lot of people who are representing sellers that are running for the hills away from VA loans. How do you relay that? And so, first of all, getting out ahead of it means diagnosing and forecasting. We talked about this during our first session. In fact, I'll bring it up again next session so we can dive a little bit deeper. Diagnosing and forecasting. As a buyer's agent with some experience, you know where the potholes are. You know where the pitfalls are. You know where the mines in the minefield are. How often are you getting out in front of that and telling them where the mines in the minefield are? You know they're not going to be competitive with a VA loan. Are you getting out ahead of that and letting them know? That's the fear and anxiety in a real estate transaction has a lot to do with uncertainty. Our fear and anxiety in life has a lot to do with uncertainty. If you're walking down the sidewalk in front of my house and I've got woods across the street from my house and you hear that big barn owl that's in the woods over there for the first time, it doesn't sound like an owl. If I haven't prepped you for that, it's going to scare the daylights out of you the first time that you hear it because you're uncertain as to what it is and what's in the woods. But if before you go out of the house, I diagnose and I forecast for you, hey, listen, when the sun starts to go down, you're going to hear some strange noises from across the street in the woods over there. Pretty much convinces the barn owl. Don't worry about it. Then when you're out on that sidewalk and you hear that sound, there's no jump. There's no quickening of your step because why? I prepped the ground for you. So you know what this environment looks like. You know how cruddy it is at this point for buyers. Are you telling them? Are you telling them that I'll submit whatever offer that you want? This is going to sound awful. May even sound like I don't have a good idea or keen grasp of what's going on in the market. History has shown me that anything less than 10K over asking, they're not even going to consider. Are you getting out in front of those things? The moment that you take the uncertainty out of it is the moment that you start to build trust that they will rely on for the remainder of the conversation, the remainder of the relationship, the remainder of the transaction. If you've got buyers that are pushing back against you, thinking that the market looks different than it does, and I know I have reason to believe that a lot of you are. There are a lot of buyers out there who are just unaware as to what the market looks like now, and they think that they can go in and throw in 150 contingencies and stipulations into the contract. And the reality is the seller wants the most money they can get with the least amount of problems. And contingencies and stipulations are problems. How are you relaying that information? The accusations audit is the best way. Whenever you want to share bad news, and of course, whenever you're going to make an ask. when you want to make the ask of the listing agent as to what's the highest offer you've got, you're going to set that question up with an accusations audit. You're going to think that I'm being naive. You're going to think that I'm probably trying to do an end around and trying to paint you into a corner or otherwise put you into an uncompromised or uncomfortable position. Are you against sharing with me ballpark highest offer? Goes a lot easier than, would you mind giving me the highest, what you're considering as the highest offer? So again, accusations audits, negative opinions, assumptions, impressions that the other side has about you, the circumstance, the environment, the conversation, everything. Make a situationally appropriate, intelligent guess. One of the best ways to do that is to ask yourself, if I were them, what would I be thinking about me? Great place to start.